Guys, what is going on? It is Mike at Mike's Total Dragon channel. Tonight I thought we would talk about, I would talk about one of my favorite companies from back in the day and one of the must-have books in the 90s. The company, Valiant, the book was Rye Zero. Now, if you are not familiar with the comic book industry in the 90s, during the 90s, in addition to Marvel and DC, you had a couple other companies come on and make some noise. One of them is still here right now in Image. The other one has long gone from its glory days, although it tends to pop up every once in a while, and puts out a handful of books that never amount to anything and then go away again, only to come back, and try to do the same thing. And they have never captured the glory they had in the 90s, and that is Valiant. Valiant was one of the companies that came up basically out of left field and really took the 90s comic book scene by storm. For the longest time, Valiant was really just known for publishing books about Nintendo. Mario, Zelda, Captain N. They did books about that. And then they started up Magnus Robot Fighter and Solar, Man of the Atom. Two books that were around in the 60s from Gold Key. They took those two titles, kind of jazzed them up a little bit for the 90s, and then started to add more titles to their line. And the Valiant books really took off. Jim Shooter, who, as a lot of you know, was there. He was the guy who kind of was responsible for Valiant taking off. He was the one that plotted its course. He was the one who did a lot of work on these early titles. He is very, very, Jim Shooter, that is, rest in peace, is a very famous editor. Before he went to Valiant, he was a very famous editor at Marvel. He was in creative control. He was the editor-in-chief during some of their biggest moments in the 80s. He oversaw so much of what Marvel had going on in the 80s. And then after a while, things didn't work out. And then he was on his merry way to the next stop, which was Valiant. But Valiant really took off. You can Google or hop on to Wikipedia and find out more about Jim Shooter and find out how he started Valiant. There's a lot of legalese stuff to it. But Valiant really took off in the 90s. It used a handful of gimmicks to take off, but not really gimmicks like you would think of per se. They would have characters appearing in an issue, and they would make no mention that they would appear in that issue. Like one of the most famous appearances is Shadow Man, which was a Valiant book. He was a saxophone player in his day job, and he low-key appeared in another issue just as a background guy, like in a bar scene. He was playing the saxophone, and then come to find out later on that was the guy Shadow Man. So they used stuff like that. They used like a coupon style contest where if you cut coupons out of certain issues, you could send them in and get a prequel style issue. They also started with the zero issues, which is what this is. The zero issue was a issue that was, for most of the time, a issue that took place before the first issue, or it was kind of like a look at things that were going to be coming down the pipeline, so to speak. One of the most famous of Valiant's zero issues was Rye Zero, and this is the first appearance of the character known as Bloodshot. Now, you may remember from a handful of years ago, the Vin Diesel movie that came out during the pandemic called Bloodshot, and it was basically based on this character here. It did not have, I have never seen it, but I don't believe that it has any of the other Valiant Universe characters in there. But Valiant was really, really popular. They had, I always said what distinguished them from Image was Valiant was very story driven. The artwork was never, it was very solid artwork, but it was never anything that was groundbreaking like what Image was doing. Their artists were very, their artists were very solid. Don't get it wrong, but there was really nothing to write home about in their artwork. The story is what drove it. Tight continuity is what drove it, and the some of the gimmicks and the little storylines and events is what really helped push Valiant at the time. One of them, like I said, this issue here, Rise Zero, this was the book to have in the 90s because it gives a blueprint for what is coming down the pipeline in the Valiant universe. So I thought it would be really fun to open this up and kind of take a look about what was going on with Valiant, and I want to talk about the characters because I absolutely loved the Valiant universe. I dug the characters. I dug the storytelling. It really hit for me. So this guy right here, his name is Jeff McHenry, and in the Valiant universe, he is what is known as a geomancer. Now, the geomancers are basically agents of the Earth, of the planet Earth. And it is like a title that is passed down from geomancer to geomancer to geomancer, each one traveling the Earth. And then when their time comes to an end, they pass the title on to somebody else. Now, for all intents and purposes, the geomancers are regular folks. The only difference is inanimate objects talk to them. So they hear the earth, they hear, the rocks, the trees. They hear, there's one instance where one of the geomancers, he finds a watch that somebody lost because he said he can hear the watch talking, and the watch says that it misses being on the guy's warm wrist. So they are able to speak to inanimate objects. Now, like you see here, he references a thing called Unity, and Unity was Valiant's first big event, and that was a lot of cosmic space stuff, time, dimension, multiverse, not multiverse, but type of deal. And spilling out of that, the Earth is telling Jeff that something's not right. So Jeff goes here to rescue this guy from this experiment who ends up becoming Bloodshot. And Bloodshot, he is a former hitman who is getting experimented on, and he has gotten all his blood replaced with a special nanite fueled blood, which gives him the ability to control electronics, and it gives him super healing, enhanced strength, durability, senses, yada yada yada, the whole generic thing. And this is his first appearance right here in this book. Although a lot of people will argue and tell you that his appearance in Eternal Warrior, I think it's 4 and 5 or 5 and 6, something like that, actually predates this. This is like his origin and kind of tells you about where he comes from. We have these guys here. These guys, they show up in another book. They're called Hardcore, and they are soldiers. And each one of these guys was in a coma, and they have this device put in their brain that allows them to access superpowers one at a time. Now, if you do not want to have this device inserted in your head and be working for this mysterious, corporation, then they will pull the device out of your head and back into the coma you go. So they were like a military type group. So this is who these guys are like. These guys are like the guys on the Matrix, in the movie The Matrix, where you have to get a operator to grant you access to these abilities. That's what these guys are like right here. Basically the same concept. Then the other people we see here, this is Eric of Dacia. He is basically a outer space Conan. He was a barbarian, and he got abducted by aliens. And while he was on the alien ship, he fought his way to freedom, and he stole their super powerful suit of armor, which is like he stole a suit of armor that's like Iron Man and Venom. It's alive, but it's also armor. This guy here, he is Turok. You probably remember him from the Nintendo 64 game. He is a Native American who got sucked into this other dimension, and he fights dinosaurs with bows and arrows and stuff. And him and Eric become like war brothers or whatever. Now this was my favorite book right here, the Valiant book, The Eternal Warrior. There has always just been something to me about a character that lives forever, like a Highlander type vibe. I've always really dug characters that were like that, and that's what Eternal Warrior is. And then basically what we see here is Jeff, he is gathering all the superheroes in the Valiant Universe, tells them there's a big event coming up. You have these guys here. These were basically like the X-Men of the Valiant Universe. They're called Harbinger. This guy here is the Eternal Warrior's brother and his best friend, Archer. That's Solar, who I was talking about earlier. And then you've got Exo-Man of War right there. That's the Eternal Warrior. Now, this is Armstrong. Armstrong and Eternal Warrior, they are brothers. They have both been alive since like the Bronze Age, or whatever you want to call it, when people were running around and in loincloths and fighting with spears or whatever. That's how long these guys have been alive. So we kind of get a little sense of the future of events that's happening. Jeff shows up and tells Archer that the big bad has kidnapped Armstrong and is trying to learn his secret of immortality. Archer was Armstrong's best friend, and he says he's going to go off to rescue him no matter what. Now, this is classic Archer and his brother, Gilad. This is classic Armstrong and Gilad. Gilad says he couldn't make it because he had a mission he had to take care of. And Armstrong says, I don't really care. I lost my best friend. Where were you at? You're my brother, and, you're supposed to be there. And part of the friction between these two is, as you can see, Armstrong was always, he liked to drink and party and have a good time. He wasn't as concerned about the fight and the mission. He didn't have the dedication and discipline that the Eternal Warrior Gilad had. So that has always been like their basis for them not really liking each other. Because Eternal Warrior is immortal, he is frequently used as a agent by the Geomancers. So he has a lifetime history. Gilad, the Eternal Warrior, he has a lifetime history with the Geomancers. And in this instance right here, it came between his brother and his brother's best friend. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And Armstrong just says, fuck it, I'm out of here. I'm tired of dealing with all this. Then this guy right here, his name was Axe, and he was in the Valiant Universe, the mutants are called Harbingers, and he was a very powerful Harbinger, and he could control machinery. Anything, computers, equipment, everything. He could control all machinery. And so because he's so, infatuated with it, he goes to war with Bloodshot, and Bloodshot he has all those, nanites in his blood, so that is very attractive to Axe. So we see Axe shows up. He killed Bloodshot. He took the blood, and then that's a real big, what's the word I'm looking for here? That's a big, the thing they're kind of looking for in this storyline. And then we have here, like I said, they have the mutants, and they're known as Harbingers. The most powerful Harbinger in this world, there's a toss-up between two. They are basically the Professor X and Magneto type of characters. One of them is named Pete Stanchek, and the other one's name is Toyo Harada. And Toyo Harada is like a Lex Luthor type. He's a very evil businessman. He has incredible mental powers. And Pete Stanchek, his superhero name is Sting. He basically puts this resistance together of other Harbingers, and they spend a lot of their time fighting and running from Toyo Harada. And then our Jeff shows up, and he talks about he's passing his legacy as a geomancer on. And then Jeff the Geomancer is talking to Pete Stanchek's wife, and he's looking for him and tells him. And this was a really cool Jim Lee gatefold cover. So Jim Lee did a hardcore gatefold cover. So basically, they have a conversation and let him know that the war between Toyo Harada and the Harbingers is about to come to an end. We see that Eric of Dacia, has this ignition ring, and that ring controls the armor. So basically, he takes the ring off, sticks it in the armor, sends the armor all the way into outer space. That way, if something happens, he can't, Toyo Harada can't get control of the armor. So he sent the armor into outer space. He challenges Harada to, he just basically kicks the door open with a sword. He gets blasted in the head. Fatal blow right here. But Harada manages to take his brain, and he manages to imprint his consciousness on this girl who just ran in. So all that's happened here. And then everyone realizes, oh shit, we've been waiting for him to die. He's never going to die. He's essentially immortal now. And then Zeppelin, she was a member of the original Harbingers. She was a girl that could fly. And then you see Solar right here. He splits himself up into two personalities and sends one into deep outer space for exploration. And he keeps the other one here on Earth. And then throughout the story, we just end up going a little further and a little further and a little further into the timeline, showing us what the ultimate fate is of so many of these characters. Here we go. Pete right here. He finally, this isn't Pete Stanchek. This is his son. He finally has a showdown with Toyo Harada. They have this big battle, and they come to find out, like in that movie Scanners, he just overwrites his personality, and ends up taking control of Harada's body. And then we see a little bit later on down the line in timeline, they begin space exploration. They start going into deep space. And that kind of gets us to where the Magnus robot fighter, that book takes place in 4001 AD. And so that kind of gets us up to what the current events are in that book, where they have a Rai, which is the protector of Japan, basically kind of like their Superman. He takes care of Japan, and his power is very much tied into Bloodshot. Their legacies are tied together. So all this stuff that happens right here is stuff that happened in the Magnus Robot Fighter book. And then it ends up with the current day Geomancer taking this guy to Bloodshot's Blood of Heroes and injected it into himself, which turns him into the last Rai, and that is who is introduced and shows up in a book that was coming out called Rai in the Future Force, and that book tied into what was going on in the Magnus Robot Fighter book. Then we have a little story here about how Jim Shooter is no longer with Valiant. But like I said, you can read all that type of stuff, because there's so much stuff that went on with Jim Shooter and his bouncing from company to company during this time period. And Google or Wikipedia will explain that better, way better than I could. So that is Double Dragon for Game Boy. Rai Zero was one of the must-have books of the 90s. And the cover, I still think the cover is super, super cool. You've got that rising sun, and then you've got him holding the sword with that gun. I still think it's a badass cover. But Rai Zero, and a lot of the Valiant books, you can find these in dollar boxes nationwide. So they're really out there. If you want to take a flyer on something, pick some of them up, thumb through them. The characters and the concepts are really cool. I'm not sure how well the storytelling's held up, but I really remember enjoying them a lot back in the day. So till next time, I will talk to you guys later. Have a good night, and bye-bye.